We are live.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Hi, everybody who's watching. If you've been watching the workshops all day, thank you for sticking around. This is going to be a good one. If you're catching this on the VOD and just trying to dig up some ancient Exceed strategy lore that you can find somewhere, then welcome. This is going to be a two-part workshop here. The first part is going to be talking about turn 0 and turn 1, both the mulligan and what your first plays should be, or things you should be thinking about when making that first turn play. And the second is going to be on implied threat and how to make your good cards better by not using them. So I encourage everybody in there to chat to, wake up a little bit, stretch up. If you've got questions, I'm going to try and see them as quickly as I can. Hope everybody can get some energy back going here. I can already see that people are leaving the chat, and it's okay. I'm not going to take it personally. But,
They're just
yeah.
getting a running start.
The last part of this I'm going to say is that some of the other workshops have been about some of I'm going to call the earlier developing levels of strategy. So a lot of things they say are just objectively true. They're true across the game of BattleCon. Some things I'm going to say here are going to cross that line into subjective experience based on games I've played and my personal play style. So feel free to challenge these opinions a little bit in chat, and I'll do my best to defend them. But I'm trying to bring you a real set of knowledge here, and this is going to be a bit more of a theory craft lecture oriented block as opposed to the game demo oriented blocks we've had before. We will have some demo material, but all in all, we're gonna show and tell rather than just show and let you guys infer for this one. So,
If I may, I'd like to note that is something you'll see in common across these workshops. Don't expect everybody's advice to agree with everybody else's advice. One of the beautiful things about Exceed is that people come to it with their own perspectives, and they develop their own play styles, and they play characters their own ways. So they're going to have different ideas about the same things. Carry on, sir.
No, I was going to say, it's one of the reasons I love how this very workshop has a workshop titled Exceed as a card game and Exceed as a fighting game at opposite ends of it to remind you that it's both. And that both perspectives are, in fact, valid, and if you don't respect them, you'll probably take a bunch of damage. So, let's talk about, you've sat down to play and Exceed with your friend, or hopefully friend, and you are about to draw those first set of cards and get started, and you have this brilliant, wonderful opportunity called the mulligan. For those of you who are just remembering, if you're the first player, you're going to draw 5 cards. Second player, you're going to draw 6 cards. And then you're going to have this chance to take up to all of the cards you have, put them aside, and redraw a fresh set of cards from your deck. This is a pretty generous mulligan as mulligan systems go. And this lets you really cultivate, to some extent, your starting hand. So what do? You're literally presented with your entire deck of 30 options, and you're changing cards back and forth, trying to figure out, what am I looking for? Which of these should I prioritize? I love this card, but this move's good too. So let's first talk about what I think are the 3 core principles of what you should be thinking about when you mulligan. 1, what is your game plan? Byron did some great discussion on game plan-oriented characters, but in general, this speaks to any character knows what they're going to want to do. You know where your good cards are, you know where your good ranges are. So you're going to look for the key cards that let you enforce the kind of game you want to play. If you're going to play a character that is, say, you're really the keep-away character in this matchup against someone who's brutal up close, like a Carl or a Zangief, you're going to want to retreat. So you may want cards that enable your mobility more than normal. But really here, you want to look for the cards that say, yes, I'm so glad I have this to work with, so I don't have to wonder when it's coming. And what these are depends a little bit also on what kind of character you're playing in from season to season. So I'm going to start by just pointing out one of the season mechanics, which is transforms. For those, again, you may be picking this up for the first moment here, but transforms are a Season 2 exclusive mechanic, where certain cards will have this special black bordered text where their boost space is. And these, when you either hit with this attack, or if you, as an action, discard one copy, you may put the other into play as a transform. You get this effect permanently, your exceed cost gets cheaper, everything is great. Except when they don't show up. So digging for transforms, especially ones that your game plan may revolve around, very importantly. We talked about Jeanette 2 workshops ago and her Black Death transform and how incredibly powerful it is. Looking for those cards is a perfectly good chance to use that deep dig that your mulligan gives you. Because remember, you're drawing from the cards that you put aside. So if I am first player and I take 5 cards, I say I'm mulliganing 5, I'm drawing from the 25 left in my deck. So my odds of getting the cards I don't have is that much higher. Exactly. Thank you for the demonstration. Another type of card that certain characters might want to look at are cards from, for Season 3, there are a few characters that have cards that are boosts that put a card directly into their gauge. Ryu most notably has the most typical type of it, which a lot of them are grouped under, called Key Charge. Literally just says, add this card to your gauge. It's on the attack Donkey Kick. Thank you. Now, this is good. Everyone likes getting gauge. It's especially good because of Season 3's critical mechanic. As long as you have at least 1 gauge, you threaten to use the critical effect when you strike and enable all of the critical triggers on all of your attacks. All of a sudden, the combat space for your opponent has changed. And getting access to it without having to go through that first clash is great. More on how this plays out when we get to the second part of this, when we talk about turn 0 into turn 1. Other kinds of key cards you want to look for, there are characters who have ultras, and specifically boosts on those ultras. You might be like, why would I want an ultra in my opening hand? Well, if the boost on it is that powerful, maybe you want it. Sometimes it will be a transformation tutor from Season 2 for someone like Taisei or Eugenia. It could be Chun-Li's, that's a perfect example. Yes. Plus 2 power, plus 1 speed. Amazing. Incredible. Awesome. I'd love to be able to know I can access this early, rather than hoping it comes up later. Chun-Li has her Ultra Parry, knocking up to, is it all normal attacks?
Up to 3.
Up to 3 normal attacks out of your opponent's hand. That could literally gut their game plan, especially if they were counting on those normals to deal with you. So there's certainly merit in looking for them. And the last type of card that you might want to look for to fuel your game plan is actually also with Spectre. And those are the cards I call reloads. These are usually ultra boosts that let you draw a certain limited set of cards, which means they get more value the lower you are on cards. And you'll often see these on very aggressive characters or characters that have a lot of force to spend. So knowing you have access to your reload already in hand lets you be even more aggressive and more cutthroat with those opening turns, because you don't have to worry about whether you're going to get it in time. Time is now. So you want the cards that matter to you. Great. Obvious. Let's move on to the second part. You want to think about, what is your opponent going to do to you? And this is going to, one, be very opponent specific, very matchup specific. So I'm going to try to stick to generalizations here. You're going to want something to do on the first turn. And this very much also depends on, am I on the play? Which we're going to talk about later. On the play meaning, did I get first turn and am I first player with 5 cards? Or am I going to be responding to whatever they do, be it an opening strike or some other form of aggression? So this is the point where, if you've never played that opponent's character before, take a quick glance over their reference card and say, okay, range 4 is far for most characters. What hits me here, aside from the standard dive and the usual things? And that'll give you an idea of, do I have a slow guard-based attack like Black Death to worry about? Do I have a dive or a dive-like that might be even better to worry about? Do I have a projectile or a fireball like Ryu's Hadouken to worry about? Knowing what could be coming, and again, we're going to dig way more into this in just a bit, lets you say, do I need a block? Do I want a block? Do I want an opening focus? Do I want an opening sweep? Because I know my opponent's going to come right at me. I like trying to reserve at least one card for a choice on what to do. Defensive opening cross, also another very good choice, especially if you believe your opponent is going to come to you, because there are very few cards that stop opening cross. And the ones that do are notorious for that. So, rule 1, you want the cards you want. Rule 2, you want an answer to what your opponent's going to do. What's left? Be unpredictable when you can. So think of this as the Asimov's laws. You want the cards that make your game work, but devote some resources to protecting yourself. And devote some resources to maybe being a little deceptive. So you may say to yourself, how does my opponent know what's in my hand? I literally just drew from every card. They haven't seen a single discard. They haven't seen a single other thing. I haven't played anything. How could they know what's in my hand? I'm the most unpredictable I can be. You are actually the most predictable you can be at this point. At very high level play, and this is not something you're going to have to really worry about at the kitchen table 95% of the time, but even how many cards you mulligan gives information away to your opponent about the shape of your hand. If I threw away 4 of my 5 cards and kept 1, I am telegraphing to my opponent there's 1 card here that I definitely care about, and it's probably one of those key cards from part 1. Conversely, if I keep 2 or 3 or 4, and I go to my opponent, they're mostly like, that could be something really good. Conversely, if they know I'm digging for one of these key cards, the fact that I've looked through anywhere up to 12 cards to find one of them, it's a lot more likely that I have it. And they can plan knowing that. So, you want to sometimes not put everything super valuable in your hand. This also refers to a subset of it, which is you will see a card and you'll be like, oh my goodness, Shoryuken, my dear friend Shoryuken, you've never let me down. You are a powerful defensive card at range 1. When my opponent comes up on me, boom, hit him with that, speed 7, great. Where are you starting the game? Not at range 1. Now, you might be in range 1 literally on the second turn, but this card doesn't do you all the good now that you might think. And there are definitely cards like this that are very matchup specific. You might want to hold focuses or sweeps against characters that are going to hit you with a flurry of attacks at close range, because you can trade back with these slow defensive attacks. But if you don't need them right now, or if they're going to become more powerful once your opponent, say, has exceeded, or we're approaching those endgame scenarios like Jay talked about, don't put them in your opening hand. Every single one of these cards matters and could be something great right now. There's no use saving something for later when you know later is 5, 10, 15 turns away, because it is very rare you will reach turn 15 or 20 of an Exceed game and still be holding a card from your opening hand. And honestly, if you do, you probably made a mistake. So, all of this information, all of these ideas are very matchup dependent, not just who you're playing, but who your opponent's playing. So, that's why this advice is kind of vague. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab a deck, Dee's going to grab a deck, and we're going to do some practice mulligans. So, yeah, why don't you go ahead and grab Imogene, and
well,
I'll
gosh,
grab Minato.
You don't have to twist my arm about
it. So, yeah, these are complete decks. Do you want to go first or second?
It's actually kind of a hard question. I'll take first.
Okay, so I'm going to be mulliganing 6 cards, and I know I'm going second. So, I'm just going to put these out in front of everybody, unless everyone can see these.
Oh, I can adjust that real quick.
All right.
There we go.
So I'm going to pretend I don't see what's in my opponent's hand, and I'm going to say to myself, okay, I'm fighting Imogene. So what do I want? Well, I'm a transform character, so I want my transforms. I want something to worry about to deal with the fact if my opponent just jumps in on me. And I want, to get rid of stuff I think might be at risk otherwise. So, this hand actually is perfect for showing that off. What are my good cards? I want my transforms. Minato loves, I'm going to say all of his transforms. I think they're all decently valuable and only grow explosively valuable when they all get put together. So I really want these all at hand. So I've got one card with a transform on it out of these. I'm probably going to hold on to this. Principle 2. What is my opponent going to do to me? Ordinarily, I've got this card here, Jump the Shark. Range 3 to 4, Power 2, Speed 6. That's an amazing opening card. Except, Imogene has really 2 openers. One is to use Dive, if she's going to strike, that is. 2 is to use this card, Holy Warding. Holy Warding literally completely dunks Jump the Shark. This card that's great against 90% of the game as a defensive opener to them attacking, terrible here. So I'm not going to hold on to this. This is a mulligan slot. This is going to go away. And now we're going to look at a few of these other cards. I'll talk about the value of blocking your opening hand in a bit, but I'm going to put it aside for there. I've got this Assault. I could take it or leave it. It could be something better. That's a chance to get another transform. And I've got these 2 Ultras.
We actually have a question, and it's related to this, to what we're about to do here. Kiribethion asks they say they often keep Ultras to use as movements by spending Force. Is that something that they should change?
That is a very good question. The answer is, I think that's a difficult thing to consider. In the very opening part of the game, you tend to have a lot of cards. I would sooner save my Ultras to pay for large single Force expenditures, or as was I think just brought up in the chat also, the movement card boosts. You spending Force to move and being willing to is one of the things that people are reluctant to, because they're like, how many cards am I spending? So thinking you're spending an Ultra is great. But burning that Ultra and all it represents, including the potential attack later, is a difficult choice to make. I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I am going to say if you're concerned about having turn 1 mobility, holding Ultras to spend as Force is probably not the way to go. Holding Ultras for the sake of holding Ultras is not a terrible idea if the boost has immediate value. But like I said, if you draw that Ultra 3 or 5 or 7 turns in, when you're starting to have the gauge to actually threaten it, or your board situation is different and you really want to put the boost into play, that card that sits in your hand that takes up that Ultra space could be something completely different. Yes, we all hate using Cross to advance, except it gets you to range 1, which is where you want to be for a lot of characters. Do not be afraid to spend your crosses to fight. And we will get to that later. But I do strongly believe that boosting Cross to run to close to range 1, or to get out of the corner, it literally is your cross to bear. You have to do it. Because the value you get from that card is basically saying, gain 3 Force. Well, gain 2 Force, but it could be 3 Force if you're crossing over someone in the corner, but the point remains. So, yes, run is amazing. Attacking its cross is good. Defending with cross is better. But, so.
Do either of these have immediate use, then, is the question.
This has some. But I don't feel the need to do it because Imogene is slow. I don't really care about this. Generally slow. She does have a couple 6s. This doesn't mean as much to me now as it does later, especially because I'm Minato. And it means that once my discard starts filling up, I can start pulling these Ultras literally out of my hat. So this can go. This one is literally about recurring cards from my sealed area. There's some merit in trying to play at turn 1 to build up a discard to generate Force. Not in this matchup. This one's going the distance. That can totally go. So I'm left with a block, which I'm going to hold on to because this is more of player knowledge than matchup knowledge. And this Flight 13, which feels pretty good as a turn 1 card. Not as good of a defensive card. But in any case, I do like having this because getting distance from Imogene feels real good, and 4 is a number she has a lot of trouble dealing with. So I would go ahead. Well, technically, I would see my opponent's mulligan number at least first.
Yep. So my choice here is pretty easy. I look at this hand and I go, Focus, Assault, Spike, all completely worthless to me. From opening positions, they do absolutely nothing. Holy Warning, actually a good attack for reasons that he actually described. And I have first turn, so I could just initiate with this off the bat, and I'll feel pretty good about that. I can also initiate with a dive. What I'd really like to get is an EX dive, or transformations. Odds of me drawing the other dive, not good. Odds of drawing some transformation, let's make them a little better. I'm mulliganing 4 cards.
Ah, the dive was there, but that's not the point. And my mulligan with 4 cards looks like this.
Yep.
So, your card state looks like it improved pretty solidly. You did get that cross.
Got a cross, didn't get any transformations, though.
Mine didn't improve spectacularly either. I drew the other Hellward Bound after trying to mulligan away the first one. But I did get a defensive cross if I really just want to leave. And, I don't know, I might get cheeky and strike with Capstan too. So, that's an example of a mulligan we might make. We'll try to go through the other ones a little more quickly. So let's gather this up, put them aside, and grab... You can stick with Imogene if you want. I will grab good old True Blue Hero Ryu.
I'll pull up Dan. I think Dan has an interesting mulligan. I'm also going to make a reference real quick, just so we can refer to it if I don't draw the card that I'm thinking of.
Fair enough.
You know the one.
Yes, I do. I do in fact know the one. So I'm going to say I'm going to go first this game. Because it actually really emphasizes that card, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I have 5. I look at my opening hand. Okay. So the thing about this is, ordinarily, this range is a great place for you to be, and Hadoken is a really great card. It goes at speed 4, does respectable damage, it keeps coming back, so your opponent then has to commit to moving into it, and it's not even actually the best at turn 1, because you don't get gauge for it if you choose to bounce it back to your hand, but it's very nice to have, except there is a very important card in Dan's kit, called Dan Kyukaku. And it is a speed 6 attack that can hit me from where I'm standing. Which means whatever I do has to be in awareness of Dan Kyukaku existing. So if I'm going to strike, I need to be aware that if I play something at the speeds I can now hit at, be it 4 with the dive or 4 with the Hadoken, I might just get kicked in the face for 6 and be in terrible shape.
3 damage. 3 damage.
Well, 3 damage, and then my opponent would also get an absolutely magnificent setup and their first piece of gauge.
True.
So, I don't really necessarily want to go on the aggressive turn 1. But I do have the play, which means with certain boosts, I can change whether that Dan Kyukaku play looks good anymore. Alternatively, if I don't draw anything, I can use my Ryu action, take a step closer, and all of a sudden that mix-up changes as well. Because if Dan Kyukaku goes over your head, it is worthless. So, with that in mind, I am thinking about, I'm going to commit to my worst case and say, I might have to move in on Dan. So, what cards are going to be good? I've got this Shoryuken, I've got this Grasp. I probably going to keep one of these, but not both of these. The Hadoken is actually not bad at range 3, especially if I could critical it, but I can't. But I'm going to hold on to it anyway. This Metsu Shoryuken is amazing. I don't think Lightning Reflexes is the card I really want to be playing turn 1. So I'm going to put that aside. This Dive, if I'm going to range 3, could be great. I shouldn't be keeping that in a Hadoken. I'm going to let that go. And this Grasp is probably better than the Shoryuken at the start of the game, so I'm actually going to let the Shoryuken go too. So I'm going to go...
Why are you holding on to Grasp if you're thinking you're going to move in to range 3?
Because... I think because I'm thinking I'm going to be at range 1 sooner rather than later. Because what I'm looking for here are cards like Assault, or other brawly kind of cards. My other idea is if I draw one of Ryu's very powerful defensive cards, like 1-inch Punch, or Donkey Kick, or just Sweep, I could stand here and boost Grasp. Now, that loses to Gadoken, which is Dan's other option, but I can threaten to pay back with power. And between... I know people have said they don't like Grasp as an attack. I like Grasp as an attack, especially because Dan can consistently produce above-curve results. So that's why I'm choosing to hold on to it. That's definitely probably the most questionable decision I've made so far.
So you're mulling 3, eh?
Yep. And I'm pretty satisfied with that, actually.
Yeah, got 2 good defensive options.
Yes, especially I'm really looking at Tatsumaki beating both Denkyu and Gadoken as a, well, if you're going to fight me, let's fight. Mm-hmm. So having seen I mulligan 3 cards, let's look over the other side of the table, and we have Jazz Hands.
We do indeed. So I'm looking at the sands, and, you know, Spike, no good. Sweep, I could boost Light if I wanted to, but I'm second player, so I'm not really expecting this to do me much good. This is an Ultra that I can't afford yet. Alright, this gets interesting. So, I've got EX Dive here. EX Dive is... Well, I know Matt has some things to say about EX Dive. Suffice to say, I want to keep it. Even if it's... In this matchup, it's probably short-sighted to consider using EX Dive as an attack, because the boost is so good. It still can get me online fast enough that I'm going to value it. And then the question is, do I keep this? This attack is actually pretty bad. And I'm playing a character who wild swings a lot. I keep this because it's bad. This gives me a different mulligan strategy than most characters, and that's because I'm playing a wild swinger. If you intend on using wild swings frequently, you should actually think about shipping back cards that you want to wild swing into. Not every character is going to do this, but Dan is one of them. So, I keep this because it's bad, and it has a good boost. I keep this because it's Jazz Hands. Mull 3.
Okay. And
there's the Danku.
You hit the Danku. Though I imagine if I were to attack turn 1 here, I would just get dived in the face. As is my want. So now that we've talked about sort of the basics of what you're looking for and how it's very matchup dependent, I'm going to, again, check for particular questions on, aside from my questionable decision about the card Grasp. But any questions specifically focused on the mulligan part of this? Because now we're going to go and talk about the turn 1 play, and talk about how some of the options value out compared to others, and what you should be thinking about when making that first choice as the either starting player or the reactive player.
I will double check the Discord chat, see if I'm missing anything.
Forgot people might be watching over there. Thank you.
Seems fairly quiet.
Go right ahead. I get this. This is going to be one of those hot take opinion questions I have a feeling of. So
that's always exciting.
Well, I'm here to be immortalized with my bad opinions. That is a generally yes, is my opinion.
So the question,
Ultras especially,
in case people are like listening to this later, do you ever mulligan a card specifically because it might be stronger if you draw it later in the game?
And as a wild swing player, D also knows the value, as you just showed, of using this mulligan as a time to cultivate the odds in your deck. I could see a universe in which, as Dan, you chose to keep one or more spikes for the sake of keeping one or more spikes, which takes that out of the realm of wild swing possibility. But definitely Ultras. I mean, the biggest example of a card that I would mulligan because I think it's more valuable later. There's 2 great ones in Minato's kit. One is Cab Stand, and one is the Ultra Hellward Bound. Now, Cab Stand, you might be surprised at, because Cab Stand's a speed 5 attack that hits from opening positions. Why would you throw that away? And Hellward Bound has a really great effect for getting a bunch of cards in your discard, which is great for you, and is the cornerstone of what the Milado sub-strategy is, because Minato has a bunch of ways of reshuffling his deck that you don't, and he can keep doing them if he sets up his deck right, and you can run out of cards long before he does.
Mm-hmm. For those
I would still mulligan.
I'm sorry.
I would still mulligan both of them away. And the reason being, I like using Hellward Bound's effect because it's discard 4 and then return 2 from your sealed area, which lets you cultivate exactly what you want in your hand. That seems a lot stronger later. Similarly, Cabstan's boost, it lets you return a card from your sealed area instead of drawing an end of turn. Both these cards matter a lot more when they interact with my sealed area. And honestly, I even like Cabstan as an attack better later, because people say to me, Cabstan's so important to Minato, no idiot would just play Cabstan. And then I play Cabstan, and they take 4 damage, and I feel great. So, the answer is I definitely... It's more than just starting positions, especially because there are definitely characters I will keep cards that say range 1 on it all day, because my first plan is go to range 1 as soon as I have the option. But there are definitely cards I would mull away because I would rather have them come up later. We've been talking around it a little bit, but let's go ahead and talk about turn 1. And I'm going to generate a fresh hand here so we can sort of evaluate a bunch of different options. Should I grab a different character?
Up to you.
I'll stick with Ryu here. So let's say I'm on the play. That's a hilarious hand. But it does. My decision making is blind to your decision making to some extent. So, wow, that's a really interesting hand. Actually, I'm definitely going to let that go in this board state. I'm definitely going to let that go. I'm going to keep these because I want to talk about them, but this is not necessarily a mulligan I would make. That's hilarious. Okay. Let's talk about turn 1 plays. So you've won the coin flip. You've chosen to go first. The common knowledge is go first. There are a few situations in which you want to go second, and we're going to talk about them right now. Reason 1: you are a character that really, really, really is cripplingly mulligan dependent. The only one I can think of that really might consider this is probably Galdred, whose entire game plan is focused around digging for the exact set of cards he needs and literally assembling himself into Exodia. There are a few characters who are super card dependent, and I could see them wanting to look at more cards. But in general, I feel like going first is the accepted wisdom when you have the option. Not to say that getting the extra card from going second isn't good, it's just reactive. And that's the thing you want to think about. When you have first turn, this is your chance to take an action before your opponent has a chance to do anything to change the state. And Jay talked a lot about it in his set play segment. Your opponent has no opportunities to use a boost, move their character, use an ability. The board is fresh and clean. You have all of the knowledge that you got from what they mulliganed or didn't. This is your chance. You have a chance to do a lot of things before your opponent can even think about hedging against them. So it's hard for me to give that up. So let's talk about things I like doing turn 1. Or things that I think are perfectly good plays turn 1. One of them I did not draw, but this came up in the chat. Boost cross. If it is my turn, and I'm definitely with specific characters, boosting cross and moving to range 1, there is nothing wrong with this. There is nothing wrong with this whatsoever, and in fact, I think people undervalue it. And I'm not just talking about characters who are range 1 oriented. This changes the entire calculus. Your opponent may have been setting up for various defensive range responses. Nope, you're here, you're in their face, let's fight. And you've done this knowing that you've cultivated the rest of your hand, maybe planning on this. So maybe that's another reason why I like to keep Grasp, because my opponents might not on turn 1, and they may not have options that are focused around range 1. But I think you should never hesitate to do this, especially if this distance is a lot better in the matchup than this one. Thing 2. Boosting. Continuous boosting. A lot of this opening math of who has the edge from starting positions, whose dive is divier, you can change that with just one light or one grasp. And when you do that, in my mind, it represents not only did I boost for stats, that I have something that's already pointed at your character. If I'm Monado and I, on turn 1, boost grasp and stare at you, it seems pretty reliable that I've got either Jump the Shark or Flight 13, or maybe both. And it means you're going to have to react to the song that I've set, now knowing you might be facing down +2 power. Conversely, your opponent has that just above curve, that Tinker Knight mobile gear that can reach you from starting positions at speed 5. Well, if I boost light, that doesn't seem quite so good anymore now, does it? So this is a way of saying, I don't have a 1-turn answer, but I have a 2-turn answer, and I'm going to use this to establish a tempo. I see some questions here. I'm going to get to this before I keep going on my spiel.
Yeah. Serato said, I figure characters who need a single very specific card to get their game plan rolling also like second, like Taisei.
That is, again, that's one of the... Even Taisei is probably one of the few I would consider doing it for. But in general, I almost would rather have the ability to do something with Taisei, depending on the matchup. There are several matchups where Taisei's options at range 4 are merely okay, and I prefer to be able to do something, anything, to start distorting the shape of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Taxi's response to that was, because Parry exists, if you need one specific card, it can be worth going first.
Right, and we're literally about to get to that block in my hand, but I wanted to say, it's like, keeping sweep and focus in Mull in a lot of matchups, they are reliable, and they are good to have on turn 1. The reason I wouldn't keep them is focus is another one example of those cards that gains value as the matchup goes on. Focus is great. Focus is even better, one, if I could reliably play it at range 1, because if I stand and play Focus on turn 1, I really wish that card was probably just block, because now I'm going to take 0 damage instead of 2 or 3. The other thing is the boost on Focus reading dramatically changing the face of the game, and that card becoming more reliable as the game goes on will make me more likely to want to mull a Focus away than keep it. But we'll get to that a little bit, because I'm literally about to talk about the other half of that too. So yes, Chaos Scissors boost is one to keep. Focus like specials and sweep like specials, I'm going to say yes with a but, because there are several characters who will look at your hand full of sweep likes and say, that is fantastic, I'm going to keep fighting you from over here. So it is generally good feeling, but you definitely want to keep an eye on who you're doing it to. So, we're talking around it, let's talk about it now. Turn 1 action, Parry. That's the boost on reading, boost on block. Name a card. Your opponent must either discard this card or show you their hand that doesn't have one. So there's that one thing that beats you, right? Now it doesn't beat you. It's gone. And maybe you have the reactive response in your hand that now feels great. That whole thing about me worrying about getting hit with Dankyu, well, now Dankyu's no longer on the table. Or maybe I'm worried about the Dankyu-Godoken mix-up, so I parry Godoken. Now I have to make them either commit to jumping in or giving up on the assault. This is super effective against those Season 2 characters who are mulliganing for cards. 'Cause remember what I said, Principle 3, you don't want to be predictable. If I know my opponent wants a certain transform, or a certain opening ability, or a certain boost that gives them a transform or some other big opening burst of strength, I will parry that every single time. So it's definitely something to consider doing, and your accuracy rate, if you start doing it, especially if you start to get a read on your opponent, will be surprisingly high. And honestly, the downside to missing isn't too bad as long as you have some reliable backup defensive option. I'm going to take a sidestep here and talk about the empty parry, or the parry exodia, as it's sometimes called. The parrying something that you know your opponent either doesn't have, or specifically naming a card that isn't even literally in the game of Exceed with the intent of just saying, show me your hand. And that's an option with block. It's hit or miss for me. There are definitely opportunities you can super exploit it. Especially if you're playing someone who is either very brave or somewhat unaware of the fact that you can do this, is you can turn one, use Parry, see their hand, and now they have a choice. They can either believe you have focus to land an attack with on the next turn and throw away all of their normals with the change cards action usually, sometimes with the move action depending on the character, or they can say, you don't have it, I don't believe you, and then next turn you hit them with focus reading, and it's terrible for them. The downside in my mind to that play is this. If you're not targeting something that specifically affects your opening positions, you get stand a chance of really being punished for it. Like, I mean, the hand on the other side of the table is exceptional for other reasons, but if I had gone ahead and turn one, said Parry Dankyukaku, and missed, but if I just said Parry Exodia, oh no. Now, not only am I in bad shape, I'm facing a mix-up of sorts between, am I just getting regular dived, or am I getting Dankyu'd? And I can't attack into it, and now I'm down a block, I've got a bunch of information that doesn't do me any good, because this is a mess that I can't actually answer. So, I definitely like parrying something. Either a card that my opponent's game plan hinges on, or that affects me right now. And if I miss, the information's a nice, pleasant surprise, rather than parrying specifically for information and risking whiffing and ending up in both losing the next strike and missing my chance. Another action that actually did get discussed in briefly in some of the other examples is move one. Now Ryu gets to do that for free, but ordinarily you'd pay a card and you'd move one. What does this do? A lot. A surprising amount. Especially for characters who usually don't have range 4 or greater kits, it means that their range 3 or closer kits are very good. Everyone can hit with dive at range 4, and there are various range attack options, and people have cards that are like dive. When you move one space closer, the world of mix-ups opens up to you. Dive gets even more powerful, actually, because now it'll evade slow attacks. But Assault is now live on the table, which makes Dive a lot riskier. Sweep and Spike are both live attacks now. And the whole shape of this turn 1 tension changes completely. And if I do want to save across, if I really do want to play KG, there is a lot that this changes the shape and value of a ton of cards in my opponent's hand just by stepping forward one space. This is a reasonable, very conservative option, and for a lot of people, stepping forward one is going to be a lot better than stepping backward one. The last thing, one other play I want to talk about is specifically the Season 2 characters. If you've got that key transform in your hand, and you've got 2 copies of it, a turn 1 EX transformation is enough to make some people just threaten to pick their cards up. They may be spending the whole game plan worrying about keeping that attack from hitting them. Doesn't matter. You got it already. They can't do anything about it. Now they have to deal with the new world where that hit. Welcome back. There is the very high-risk play that I want to talk about. This was on the Discord meta. This is named after a particular player, Juppies, who used to do it astonishingly a lot, and that is turn 1 reading. This is super risky, but it's also super powerful potential payoff.
It's also really funny.
It is also really funny. It is committing... We sometimes refer to Juppies, the player who does this, as the truest anime protagonist we have ever played against. And this is true. This is the believe in yourself option, if ever there was one in Exceed. So you play reading, you call out something like Grasp, or something like enemy dive, and then you dive into it, and you do cool things, and you jump in there, and wow, you just got this great unanswered attack. And if you missed, maybe you somehow make it work anyway, you get to your opponent's hand. Man, is that committing a lot. Especially turn 1, you're also spending 2 cards to this, so you're probably going to close to range with 3 cards in hand to your opponent's more. There is a specific reading I do want to call out as potentially devastating. And that is specifically reading Cross. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Cross is an unbeatable defensive card. It's super good. Why would you not, why would you make your opponent play Cross when you can't actually get payoff from the reading? Let's look at Cross again. Sorry, I keep moving cards thinking I'm going to be showing them off, but I'll leave them where they are. So, Cross's Boost lets us advance 3 spaces. Cross's Strike retreats you 3 spaces. If you make your opponent strike with Cross, that means that they kept the Cross in their opening hand. Which means they probably wanted to get closer to you, not further away. So, take a character like Zangief, or Carl Swangy, or anyone who loves range 1. The odds of them keeping that Cross in their opening hand for that mobility, for that easy in, pretty high. I mean, gosh, I would want to be at range 1, wouldn't you? Especially when I'm a giant, bear wrestling Russian man. So, if you can make this call out, not only have you forced them to retreat from you, you've burned one of their only tools of getting in cheaply, which means the cost of them coming back is now significant. So this is worth missing on, because you can definitely generate some immense value and pressure on your opponent by saying, your Cross is gone, you're far as heck away, and especially if you have a ranged attack option you can rely on. If I'm Ryu, and this is the board state, I am so excited right now, because this is the dream. This is the dream where I hope Hadoken is somewhere in my hand, but this feels great. So, high risk, high reward. Specifically want to call out reading Cross as a way to make grapplers and close range fighters cry. And one of the other reasons, again, to try to keep yourself unpredictable if you have to. So that's been a lot about what you do as the active player. Why haven't we talked a lot about... Yes?
There were a couple
you have a question?
Things. What about turn 1 prepare?
Alright. There are 2 actions I have here that I don't love. And this is where I'm going to get it. I really don't like turn 1 prepare. I think it's giving up that opportunity. You could have done literally anything else to increase... You put it this way. On the first turn of the game, you've had a chance to choose 5 cards out of 10 or so cards. And you know, now that it's set, now that we're past the random part, you know what the value of all of these cards are. Yes, there are situations where you're going to be playing very defensively, and you might want to hold an option over your opponent. More on that later. But there has to be something in that hand of cards you have that increases the value of these cards. Either putting yourself in a position where more of them are live, or more effective, or threatening a card that your opponent might think you might have. Those are all reasons to do something rather than just take more cards. So I really don't like prepare as a turn 1 play. That's probably one of the hotter takes, I will say. The other specific thing that I will call out as a turn 1 play I don't like is for the people who are like, oh, I want to keep away, I'm going to hold on to Assault and turn 1 backstep. Why don't I like this? 3 reasons. 1, you're not getting a ton of value. You're moving 2 spaces of the 4 that backstep can give you. 2, this is starting positions, right? Say I know my opponent wants to come to me. If I spend my turn going to here, and they play the Cross that they probably have anyway, oh look, we're actually really close anyway. And 3, if you put yourself in the corner, this awesome card lane Cross is a lot less good. And if you're playing a ranged attacker and you know your opponent's going to want to close the distance, having your Crosses be live as defensive tools is super important. Because now you're stuck in the corner, and unless you're someone with teleport shenanigans, you're going to need to eventually probably spend this Cross to get out of the corner, and then you still don't have the Cross. So I would probably never backstep turn 1 unless I completely whiffed and my opponent's turn 1 mix-up was, speed 6, range 4, deal 30. That's not true. If it was said deal 20, I'd probably still boost to move. But those are probably also situations where I'd consider just, say, moving in 1 to otherwise change the math in a more significant way. So I really don't like boost backstep, and I really don't like turn 1 prepare, because honestly, I feel like you have a chance to get a lot more value out of being the first player than just preparing.
Terminus Ooze was not here earlier and asks why there doesn't seem to be a reason to go second.
We did say briefly the big reason to go second is for the rare characters who really need specific cards, and this could also be very matchup dependent. If you're a character that has a slow ramp up and you have 1 or 2 boosts that really speed that up, and you're playing against somebody who is incredibly aggressive, that may be the difference between, a 30-0 loss and a close-fought win. Going second would let you see more cards in your mulligan and dig deeper into your deck to have a chance of finding that one card that you need. What if you're Lily? I still wouldn't backstep turn 1 because I'd rather have that backstep later.
Yeah,
and if I'm at range 4, I want to fight. I want to play sweep. Let's go.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, if I'm Lily at starting positions, my opponent's options are terrible and mine are great. Let's fight. I want to play. I have a turn 1 Lily. For those of you who don't know, Lily has on her front side has +0 to 1 range on everything.
On normals.
It's just on normals? Oh, that's right. It's just on normals. The point is, it's on everything that matters.
Yes.
So, whereas your opponent has the mix-up of dive or not dive, I have Lily on turn 1 has the mix-up of assault versus sweep, which is complete nonsense. So, yeah, I definitely wouldn't backstep turn 1 with Lily.
And by the way, if anyone is discounting this because it's a Season 1 character and Season 1 is out of tournament rotation, look forward to LUYG.
That's a good point. So, yes. We have talked a ton about what to do on the play. Let's talk briefly about what to do on the second play. How are we for time? We're looking okay.
We're great.
I'm going to curse through this pretty quick, though. You guys have seen a bunch of discussion already today about the speed curve and about how certain cards are effective in certain ranges. We're here at range 4. The math generally comes down to, is it dive or is it not dive? If your opponent goes to you, the other player, and this is putting the character-specific options aside, and they slam a card on the table, you say to yourself, is that dive? Or is that not dive? If it's dive, you have a response. You usually play something slow and tanky, or you play cross and just get out of the whole situation. If it's not dive, it could be something that ruins your day in some other ways. Maybe it's an empty bluff. Maybe it's a block. Maybe it's a fireball effect that could even catch you if you tried to cross out. Maybe it's a slow fireball effect that's expecting you not to move. But really, the question you should be asking yourself is my opponent going to be at range 1 to me with an attack with 5 power at speed 4? And start there, because everything else revolves around that. So, again, this is part of it which gets very character versus character specific. Obviously, Dankyukaku completely warps the shape of the turn 1 opener by its very existence. But, cross, great option. Get out of jail. Block, great option to hold as the second player. You just kind of reject the whole situation. Assault, if you're really gutsy or your mulligan was really poor and you really think it's dive, well, you just dodge the dive. Not terrible. Focus and sweep, you trade, and you're going to trade up either in cards, both in cards and generally in life. Sweep would trade up by 1. Focus would trade up by 1. Yes, yeah. And either take a card from your opponent or gain an extra 1 for yourself. Good responses. Again, it's the comfortable, safe option, except if your opponent has any kind of attack that they don't have to go to you to hit with. There's one other thing. to do a second player, which is completely ignore the idea of caring about what your opponent does turn 1 and just slap the top card of your deck. You have 30 life at this point. This is very much of a player choice. There are a lot of people who will say, I have 30 life, the first 5 of it doesn't really matter that much. And there are players like me who I don't like the idea of giving up the chance of, like, not having a choice about doing something about 5 damage and a gauge and positioning. I want a choice in the matter, so I'm going to reserve some thinking about it. There are lots of players who won't, and they, like I said, they'll tap the top of my deck and hope the answer's there. And that's a choice. And I do want to talk lastly about the ultimate, and I use this in quotation mark, turn 1 defensive option. Because the last thing your opponent's really thinking about is, what if it's 2 dives? So I say to myself, my opponent, is ready, is prepared. I've got my dive queued up. They've got, nothing they can really do about this. We're going to trade up some damage. It's going to be great. Let's go. Let's fight. And I see them playing EX on the other side of the table, and I go, well, crap. EX dive, again, colloquially referred to as jazz hands, because all you can really do is hold your hands up in the air and go, woo, because there's no way you can model your turn 1 strategy around getting hit with EX dive. It will happen. It will suck. You'll take 6, your game plan is ruined, and it is one of the most frustrating things that'll happen. If it hasn't happened to you yet, I promise it will in the future. When it does, I'm sorry in advance. What do you do when you get hit with jazz hands? And there's only one piece of advice I can give you, which is do not tilt. This is one of the most tilting and frustrating things. You've already started planning out turn after turn. You've slapped that dive down. What do you mean I'm down 6 life? This is bull. Well, it happens. And you can't really customize your strategy around this set of cards coming up. And this beats a lot more than just the other dive. Like, there are a lot of short range pokes that would also beat dives, but not beat 2 dives because they only do 2 damage. Don't tilt. And remember that your opponent is now down 2 dives, which means all of your boosts now just got a lot better. And just try to put the game back together from there. So don't worry about getting hit with EX dive. I wouldn't even plan about getting hit with EX dive. Just don't let EX dive break you in half. Sweep focus turn 1 against an EX attack. I would not play jazz hands into an opponent because that's threatening to get crossed very easily. I would almost always play jazz hands as the defender against a single card. And that's why jazz hands is the, I say, ultimate defensive option, because the vast majority of opening strikes lose to jazz hands, even if they would be great otherwise.
Makes sense.
So,
Terminus says jazz hands seems dangerous for the player.
Although, it's dangerous for everyone. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just literally 2 minutes when we talk about implied threat and EX attacks. But yeah, there's a lot of cost in spending those 2 cards, but there's a lot of value in taking your opponent's opener and literally turning it on its head. So the choice is yours. If I'm the first player and have jazz hands, would I prep? Gosh. Probably not, because I don't want to spend jazz hands, and I'd rather probably just dive on my opponent if I think it's live, and assume I don't get jazz hands back, because when I play one dive, my opponent's going to say, well, they clearly don't have the other, and then 1 or 2 turns later I can pull that out. But I would definitely not play jazz hands as the attacker, and if I had jazz hands in my opener as first player, I feel like my mull has probably gone wrong, and I would probably want to... I would consider moving in 1, because speed 5 EX dive feels even better, because that mix-up is scary, and makes my opponent flinch, and I'm more likely to get a value card on top of the dive. I would also consider boosting Grasp rather than prepping if I had EX Dive in hand. But yeah, we're going to talk a lot about opportunity cost of cards in just a minute. Any other questions specifically focused on turn 1 play and Mulligan? And then we're going to roll right on, because I've taken up enough of your guys' time on this part. All right. And we can double back on questions that are specifically focused around turn 1 play and Mulligan after. But for now, we're going to keep going on to segment 2, which is talking about Implied Threat. And we're going to start by looking at some incredibly silly cards. Some of these you are familiar with because they have ruined your day. Some of these have not and will soon. But here's an example of 3 cards that are absolutely nuts in the game of Exceed. First, we've got Crusader's Oath. Season 2 card from Jeffrey. Attacks with higher speed don't hit you. There's a huge swath of incredibly dangerous and deadly cards in the game that are just gone. They're not even relevant anymore. Why? They're too fast. This card is insanely good. Next, we've got Spinning Piledriver. Speed 4, which you have to keep in mind, Zangief math, which is every number is 1 higher because I'm hugging you. Zangief's critical on his front side gives him +1 power and +1 speed if the strike begins at range 1. So for purposes of this card, you can add 1 to its power and speed, and this is a power 6, speed 5 attack that ignores armor and guard. Now, just like we said, huge swaths of cards no longer mattering, same thing here. Everything that's speed 5 or less against this card just stops, unless it specifically has stun immunity. Everything else, better luck next strike. Just no matter how much armor, how much guard, how many defenses you can come up with, if you can't physically prevent this attack from hitting you or be immune to stun, and even if you're immune to stun, you're probably not trading that well with it. Moving on to cards that also make a mockery of a bunch of things, we have Shield Boomerang. Now, Shield Boomerang is a card on the Shovel and Shield Knight character. So it's important to remember the Shovel Knight is one character, and the Shield Knight is a marker that they key some of their special attacks off of. And this attack specifically says, attacks at range 2, 3, or 4 from Shield Knight do not hit you. So this can cover a 3-section space of the board, and say, if you're starting your attack from one of these squares, doesn't matter. So that can literally be the square that Shovel Knight is on, and the range 1 square on either side. That is a huge amount of space that your attacks just don't work on. Or it could be, range 1 to 3 in front of Shovel Knight as his back is to the corner. That's really difficult to deal with. The very threat of this attack is not so much in the 6 damage, it's in the 6 damage and the nearly perfect defense that it can grant. These cards are nuts. These cards are amazing. You wish you had more of them. Like, they're so good. There's a way to get more value out of these cards than just playing them. And that's what we're going to talk about when we talk about Implied Threat. And before I get any further, I want to point out there's a very powerful Implied Threat card that you have on your character too. It's called Spike. So first, what do I mean when I say Implied Threat? We're talking about the technique of holding a powerful card or a situation warping card over your opponent to extend the value of that card over multiple strikes. This is different from just making a mix-up. If my opponent knows I have Spike and Assault, and I put a card down at range 3, that's a mix-up. Are they going fast or slow? Are they breaking my slow attack, or are they jabbing out my attempt to get over it? Or close to it? That doesn't evolve as the strikes continue onward. What Implied Threat is using the potential that this card is coming out to make other cards that could be unsafe or poor land over and over again. I never noticed that myself. Thank you for pointing that out. Apparently, the Ignore, Guard, and Armor are in different order on Spinning Pile Driver than they are on Spike.
I never noticed that.
Wow.
Interesting.
I can never unsee it.
We're learning today.
They're also the ones that boost it, for good reasons. Hot take today, Spike boost, undervalued.
Oh, that was a response to there are 2 types of Exceed players. The ones who hold
Right.
Spike, and the ones who ditch it as soon as possible.
Right. So why is this Spike an implied threat card? So the very presence of you having Spike as a card makes your opponent think twice at range 2 or 3 about playing these great slow defensive cards. Focus is great. Sweep is great. These cards have great stat lines, they have great defenses, they do a big chunk of damage, they give you more cards. Who couldn't like playing these? The answer is, if you have a chance of literally losing out on all of the value that these cards grant in one shot and taking 5 damage for it, it's a lot. It makes you pause. So you can use the idea that your opponent has one to either make other cards safe or create a threat, like you represent the card in your hand. So let's talk about different ways that you can generate implied threat that are independent of the contents of your hand, and how you can use this technique on your opponent. Now, when I originally wrote this up, I talked about trying to model this in a game situation, and the answer is it's very difficult to model implied threat when you are literally running a lesson on saying, don't believe what I say, but do believe it sometimes. So the first kind of implied threat is Gauge. Now, you might notice all of these amazing cards here have an opportunity cost in addition to the cards themselves. Critical Spinning Pile Driver costs you 1 gauge. Crusader's Oath costs 2. Shield Boomerang costs 3. So there is merit to holding on to the gauge for these cards solely for the purposes of threatening their existence. And this can be independent on whether they're in your hand, but you want to make sure that this bluff doesn't keep going if you literally have both copies in your discard where your opponent can see them. But the very fact that these cards are so powerfully warping means when you hit key gauge numbers, an experienced player will already begin to hesitate, and you can prey on that. One of the other super powerful ways of implied threat that revolves both around gauge and around something else fun requires me to bring out the the dictator of implied threat. And that's M. Bison. So we're going to clear this board off for a moment, and we're going to talk about M. Bison. He has a unique ability that lets him literally generate gauge out of his hat. He has ultras that hit with incredible power, and he's got 2 cards that I find incredibly oppressive, especially when he criticals them. And I'm going to point 2 of them out right now, even though I'm not going to say they're his best cards, but they definitely have an immense pressure feel about them. So let's look over here at Sliding Kick and Head Stomp. Sliding Kick is a speed 5 attack that has the potential to pay out with 6 damage and pushing your opponent away, because your opponent, Bison definitely loves his opponents at range 3. A lot of these cards, you'll notice, do their best at range 3. So that's a huge potential payoff, and it beats Grasps too, because the Grasp pushes him away, but too late. He's already here, he's kicking you in the face, you're taking 6. This is a great card. Head Stomp over here next to it is one of the, it's like the quintessential epitome of Bison power. 6 speed at range 3 for 6 power? Sure, you know, there's the Zolt's Fatal Eye can get up there, but he's got to spend a lot to do it, and that's speed 7. Yeah, but this is literally 1 gauge. He can have this on the second turn of the game. He has this threat live that you're going to take 6 just for standing at range 3. But what's the important thing about these 2 cards? I'll take guesses from the audience real quick. What's the 2 notable things about Critical Head Stomp and Critical Sliding Kick that are very, very important?
Spot the commonality.
This also gives you a chance to take a sip of water while we wait for the...
Oh, that's a good idea.
So we're maybe getting a little lag, or maybe people are a little bored. But either way, we're going to move on and say they both have 6 power. 6 power is great. 6 power is a big chunk of damage. 6 is the amount of guard that Sweep has. That also works on trades with all of these cards. Ah, dang. And Focus, if you're using it the wrong range, that'll trade up too. Oh, dang. Wow, these cards that are like immense power and decent speed threats don't actually beat these 2 defensive cards. Crit Head Stomp does cross, it does. But Crit Head Stomp is you spending a gauge and a very powerful card to trade with Sweep. That doesn't feel great at all. In fact, that feels terrible. So, what do? How do we make these cards hit the opponent and pick off those crosses? Well, there's one more critical in Bison's kit that is super important. And that's Critical Spike. Hold on a second, you say. There's no critical symbols on Spike. What does Critical Spike matter? Critical Spike matters because what it implies. Because remember, these cards are face down. When you go to your opponent and you move one of those gauges that are pretty easy for Bison to get, to your discard, say critical, and slide a card across the table to them, it's hard for them not to imagine that 2, 3, 6, 6 coming right at them. But they have the answer, right? They heard the first part of what I said. They play Sweep. And you spike them for 5. And now they have to think again. Because we've just gotten 2 for 1 value from the Head Stomp. We got 5 damage for you thinking I had it, and I'm going to get 6 damage later because I'm going to definitely play it again. And this matters whether or not the Head Stomp is in my hand. So every time you can create a bluff, you can turn more cards in your deck into Head Stomp, and that's a great feeling. So just because, and this is a mechanic that Season 3 characters specifically can use, but you can critical bluff cards threatening a new stat line, and because you spent a gauge on it, it feels a lot more credible as a bluff, that are not the card you're playing at all. And that means that not only have you gotten value from this strike, you've gotten value from the next one. And there's a lot of value to that. You declare crit before you flip the card. And that's in order of players setting it. So when I, as the attacker, make an attack, I declare place my attack. This is also when it becomes aware if it is EX. And I would say it is critical by spending 1 gauge. My opponent then chooses what they are responding with, including an EX or critical or an EX critical of their own. The only thing you do on reveal is pay the gauge cost for your ability. But you have to pay critical first.
For your ultras.
Yes.
Yeah. So on reveal, that's when you pay force for 4 specials or gauge for ultras. Critical is paid when you set your attack.
Yes.
Directly before you set your attack.
So that is specifically applicable to Bison, but generally applicable to other people. By holding the threat of the card that they think is coming over them, it's like you get to play it multiple times. And I'm going to talk briefly about the there's new season content, Season 5. Season 5 has 2 mechanics that are very well suited to implied threat and implied threat-based strategies. One is the season's overdrive mechanic. And I'm going to speak in vague terms. When your character activates their Exceed mode, it's through overdrive. And overdrive doesn't just give them a benefit, say, immediately, but every single turn they remain in that mode, they gain a benefit that continues. Can we talk about any of them in particular?
Overdrive is... yes. So I talked about character mechanics, character-specific abilities on the podcast the other week. Overdrive is mostly known. So who do you want to talk about?
I'm going to say Null is a great example of an implied threat overdrive.
Yep, Null's ability is fantastic. Her frontside ability is when you initiate a strike, you can spin a gauge for +1 speed. But her overdrive ability is all of your attacks, when you initiate, automatically have +1 speed and hit gain advantage. She also has the overdrive effect of when she discards a card from her overdrive, she either closes or retreats one.
So we now have a great way to generate an illusion of cards that aren't in our hand. And a great way to exploit our opponent's sense of fear of always being 1.5 speed behind. Because every time we keep hitting, we keep getting advantage and we keep being able to press the attack. It means that we can open up this barrage of flurry of slow attacks with a sweep that our opponents might not expect, because it still lets the chain continue. And if they play any number of slow defenses, they're going to probably trade down. And even more so, open themselves up to the flurry of attacks that are still yet to come. So just because we have this +1 speed that is carrying over from round to round until our overdrive ends, doesn't mean we have to go first. It just means we have to keep hitting so we can keep the flurry going. So our game plan and the game plan our opponent thinks they're facing are two different things. And the other very powerful source of implied threat is the Astral Heat mechanic of Season 5. These are, when you take the reshuffle action in Season 5, you add a card that is your character's specific Astral Heat to your hand. And these are usually very powerful, ultra-shaped moves. They will cost gauge to use, and they will do damage ranging from, high single digits to yes. And I can't go into any more detail than that, but they are very powerful, but they're also limited. But the reshuffle action is usually a low-tempo action in the game of Exceed. You reshuffled, you get one card back from that. It could be a bunch of other cards fresh, but you usually kind of, feel like you lost a step on the turn you reshuffle. But if you have Gauge on deck, and you have, say, the cost of your Astral Heat in play, your reshuffle action is the equivalent of, cocking a gun at your opponent and then hitting them with it, because you're Null, and we don't shoot people with guns, we just smash them. Right. But the point remains, you create an immediate active threat that your opponent has to respect, and there's value in holding onto that card or setting up that card to be live once you add it to your hand. So any questions on that? And then we're going to move on to sort of one more topic on it and sum everything up. All right. So we alluded to this briefly when we talked about the opportunity cost of jazz hands, and this is something that is universal across cards in Exceed, with very rare exceptions. I've always felt like I'm gonna take that as like implied threat was more to make the opponent throw away the counters to big threats rather than being able to land the weaker cards. It's true. You can definitely they're both really approaches to the same idea. By holding the threat of the thing that they don't want to get hit with over them, you've made those you're willing to spend weaker attacks to burn through their defenses. The premise is the same. You've gotten more value out of the card, even if the card is known in hand, than you have by simply playing it. And it's one of the few things that twists the information economy of Exceed on its head. It's one of the few times where it may not even matter if your opponent knows, and your opponent will know in the case of Astral Heats. They literally just saw you pick it up and put it in your hand. But it is definitely... I believe Jay talked about this in his endgame setup discussion about Assault being very powerful at endgame because it doesn't break a block, but it does burn a block and then force another attack with you on the advantage. That can work the same way here. If your opponent thinks they're about to get hit with something large, you can definitely plink away with them with something smaller that is defensive or evasive, and then continue to make them worry about what's coming. So one of the ways we've talked about ways you can get it. Let's talk about the way you can lose it, and that's EXing. EX attacks are great, but with very rare exceptions, I don't think any exceptions in standard characters. There are. I don't know if I can comment on that, but
copies of every card.
There was a question saying, so the Hazama method. And I'm going to say,
having fun yet is known.
Okay, well, so, or even just the idea that Hazama's abilities are very well suited to your opponent, making them think, did I play the good one? Did I play the good one yet? And I think I can say that without going too deeply into his kit. The way you lose Implied Threat is you've got 2 copies of every card. If those 2 copies are gone, and you haven't reshuffled, and your opponent says strike, that card's not coming up. There's no way to make that card come up, barring a mechanic I've forgotten somewhere. There's no way to make that card magically reappear this strike. So you've taken away the threat of that card existing. When you play an EX, you remove the implied threat of that card coming back down the line. And that's the real opportunity cost of Jazz Hands. Your opponent knows for the next however many cards until you reshuffle, they're not going to get dove. Their dives, their sweeps are safe, except they get spiked. But they're not worried about that card anymore. And that applies to a lot of very powerful cards where you may not want to play the pair because the single one maybe is enough. And you have to question to yourself, is it worth the value of losing the implied threat of a card like Spinning Pile Driver by playing EX Spinning Pile Driver? And I think that's one of the perfect examples of a card where you might be like, more stats are better, and I think that the answer to this is not the case. So, going back to Spinning Pile Driver, EX Spinning Pile Driver with the critical would be speed 6, power 7. Oof. Speed 6, power 7. Yeah, that even catches crosses. Oh my gosh. Why wouldn't I want that? Because I'd rather play 2 Spinning Pile Drivers. And unless this is an endgame scenario where 6 damage is, or 7 damage is all the damage I need to do before the game is over, the idea that my opponent still has to worry about this card has a lot more value to me than dealing an extra point of damage on something that's already very likely to win. This is even more dramatic when you look at, say, Shield Boomerang. If that card damage isn't lethal, I want that card twice. I want that card 15 times. I mean, between the card itself and its boost, my goodness, I would fill my deck with Shield Boomerangs. Except, why would I EX it in that case? And that, United Yakuza don't EX your hard shots. No idea if Sagat should or not. Sagat sometimes will EX his stuff because it creates breakpoints.
Yes, he needs to know his breakpoints.
Right, and this is very valuable also as, and I believe there'll be more about this, as decks get smaller and options continue to disappear. If you know your opponent can't get away, and you, as your opponent, if say your opponent is, I'm going to give you an example of a decent set of breakpoints. I'm Exceeded Sagat. My opponent's in the corner. I'm at range 1 to them. I boost quick backdash, and I slam EX face-up spike at them. I probably still don't want to do it, but my goodness, is that a really hard-to-beat line. So that would be a speed 5, ignoring guard and armor.
The reason to do this is specifically because that 5th point of speed, that puts you on curve.
Right.
That's a big deal.
So I wouldn't play that because I want 1 more point of power. Obviously, it's spike. I want 1 more point of power, obviously, if it wins me the game. But the real reason to play this as a face-up EX and be willing to give up on the threat of it is because it tosses that line between beatable to unbeatable. Or very unlikely beatable, I guess I should say.
Yeah, EX Assault, I guess.
Yes. And now we're going to take a few moments and talk about the people who break that rule, which is the power of surprise EXs. There was some talk about this in the earlier workshops, but here are two of the finer examples of this. We've got Carl Swangy here, who's his character ability doesn't have to do with EXs, but his ultras do. His ultras have a unique trait on them, which says that these can be paired with any normal attack to create an EX. This lets you do all of the EX shenanigans using your normals without giving up the implied threat of you holding the second copy. You can play that EX spike using an ultra, and your opponent can't assume they can stop worrying about spike. Same thing. Carl can jazz hands for opening positions a lot more freely than other characters. One, he's a lot more likely to have it. And two, he's a lot more willing to spend it. Because while he spent a bunch of resources to get it, he's at his preferred range, and he's still not out of dive, because he's got another one somewhere in his deck. And that's an enormous power. Remulus is another great example of this power. Yes, it's expensive for her to force her attacks to become EX, but she's also got, and I also want to talk about the characters, Remulus also being one of them, Monado being one of them as well, who can generate a broad variety of potential EXs while setting one card. Through Monado's Bus Stop transformation, or through the Transform on Irradiate for Remulus, several attacks become automatically EX'd. And when you play one of these, now your opponent's math has changed. Because it's true, they can look at your sealed area, and they can look at your gauge, and they can look at your transform area and say, okay, it's possible for these 7 cards to be EX'd, or these 10 cards to be EX'd. But that amplifies the math in a way that they now have so many more threats that otherwise would be below curve or weak are now problems. One of the more other notable limited ones, but is very relevant, I think, is King Knight. Has a boost that makes a card in his discard. If it matches the card he's played, it becomes an EX. And this is one shot, but him playing this boost now makes you recalculate the value of every single card. If he's 20 cards into his discard, that's basically could be anything left. So when he sets that one card, it is the same effect as those critical bluffs. Your opponent now has an entirely new set of worst-case scenarios that make the card that wins that strike may not even gain that benefit. But it creates the shadow of so many more dangers that your opponent now is more reluctant to play into it. So keep an eye out for these effects. They're very powerful. Don't get caught off guard by them. And when you're playing against them, respect them to a point. Because if you fall victim to your opponent's implied threat, again, it's like they're carrying a hand full of shield boomerangs or spinning pile drivers, because they'll get to use the idea of it against you over and over again. Any questions?
All right, thank you for your time, Matt.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. I hope that people at least enjoyed it. I hope that you at least considered cards or techniques differently than you might have before, and everyone levels up a little bit, as is the point of this workshop. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yep, have a good one.
Bye.
All right, this has been Turn 0 and Turn 1, Mulligans and Openers, as well as the power of Implied Threat with MadFnorder.